Good evening, everybody. It's Dr. Michelle Fanensteel coming to you live from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm in this wicked cool loft, and I am, after a long day of class, in case you think you guys are the only ones that have to go to class, I've been in Fisheries HACCP, train the trainer all day. And before I go out with a buddy for a drink, I am bringing you salt-cured fish live office hours. And we are going to get started on time. I know there's a lot of interest in this topic. This is not the only office hours I'm going to be doing on this topic. And so I just, the goal behind this office hours is to introduce people to salt curing fish, how we think about it, methods of production, and that good sort of stuff. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of time to join us. If somebody wants to ping me and tell me that you can hear me, that would be delightful. And otherwise, I'm going to assume you can hear me. So this is, we're going to kind of have a short office hours this week, not only because my brain is mush from being in class all day, but there are a ton of questions around salt curing fish and generally producing fish for wholesale consumption. I'm a big believer in it. And I think that we can build resilient locals economies around fish, and which is why I decided to come do Train the Trainer in Fisheries HACCP. And so without further ado, I think we should get started. By all means, post questions. I have already done office hours on Listeria and Clostridium. I have done some office hours on parasites. I have not done one specifically on zoonotic parasites from fish, but we'll probably revisit that. And if there's interest, I can talk about histamine containing species in fish. This is something we only worry about in fish. We don't worry about it in pork. So anyway, by way of introduction, I'm Dr. Michelle Fanensteel. I run Dirigo Food Safety. I am the food safety admin here at the Salt Cured Pig, and it's my delight to be with you all this evening for a little bit to talk about salt curing fish. Okay, so there are some places to start when we want to start talking about curing fisheries products. The first thing to know is that fish is regulated differently than red meat in the United States. It's not the case in other countries, but it is the case in this one. So fish and fisheries products, which includes alligators, frogs, turtles, as well as molluscan shellfish and crustacean shellfish. Those are all regulated by what's called the Fisheries Hazard Guide. And if you are producing fish in any way, shape, or form, you're probably going to have to refer back to the Fisheries Hazard Guide. If you are doing smoking fish at retail, almost every food code that I know of, and I think every food code that I know of refers back to the Fisheries Guide if you are doing a smoked fish product. I do want to draw your attention, if we have anybody from New York, if you are smoking fish in New York, you need a scheduled process. You would get those scheduled processes from Dr. Bruno Xavier at Cornell Cooperative Extension. Ping me and I will give you his contact information. He's a super awesome guy and loves to work with entrepreneurs. And your tax dollars pay his salary. So those are some things to keep in mind. So the FDA regulates all fish and fisheries products. There are a whole set of HACCP plans that I uploaded to the files. And take a look at those. You will notice, however, that there is not a cold smoked HACCP for salmon production over there. And that's because the FDA has a gigantic, huge, enormous problem with cold smoked salmon. And so let's, and we're focusing on salmon because that's the most popular one, but we could be talking about cold smoking haddock or, pollock or mackerel or whatever it is that you want to cold smoke. I will say that we are not talking about canning in this particular live in this particular live office hours. I can talk about the low acid canned food regulation, and so I guess I know what I'm doing for my next office hours there, Jules. But we can certainly talk about low acid canned foods, and I want to bring up that it is entirely possible when producing food for wholesale consumption that you fall under multiple different regulatory authorities for what you are doing. So if you are producing like a potted meat, You have to follow USDA HACCP, but then you also refer back to low acid canned food regulations. But we can talk about that later. So for tonight, brining, cell curing and brining fish. I did put up processing parameters for cold smoked fish in the files section. It's 83 pages. I mean, I'm a nerd, but I think it's really good information. And there's a process flow diagram, and there are critical limits in there. It is an FDA study and can be used for validation and information in your HACCP planning. So let's just dive on into it. Oh, that was for cold smoking. Got it, Jules. Yeah, it's a tough subject. Okay, so but for the first thing, when we talk about HACCP planning, of course, HACCP is a process for thinking and diagramming out what you do. I want to emphasize that when we talk about fisheries HACCP, we talk about it differently than we talk about USDA HACCP. In USDA HACCP, we have a whole 12 steps of things that we do that are required to be documented by the USDA. That is not the case in FDA. When we talk about FDA HACCP, we are talking to make a comparison about the CCP documentation you would have in your USDA HACCP plan, okay? In FDA HACCP, you do not have to document your food safety team. You do not have to document your product. You do not have to document your intended user. You do not have to document your process flow diagram, and you don't have to validate it. Now, as somebody who's been doing this for a long time, I don't know how you do HACCP planning without those things, and we highly recommend them, but the FDA cannot hold you to what you have documented in there. The next thing that you don't have to document is a hazard analysis. Of course, we take our process flow diagram and we develop a hazard analysis over that, and I've covered that in other webinars. But ask me questions. I'm happy to give anybody a update on it. So in Fisheries HACCP, that hazard analysis doesn't have to be written. The only thing that has to be written is what your critical control points are, what your critical limits are, how you are monitoring, what your corrective actions are, how you are verifying, and what's your validation for that. That is the only thing that is required to be documented in Fisheries HACCP. Okay, so with that in mind, I don't know how to do HACCP without doing process flow diagramming and product description. So step one, specifications. You know, we talk about this every office hours. What do you make and how do you make it and where are you getting your supplies? I can't overemphasize how important those questions are when we're talking fisheries HACCP. All right. So what are you making? If you are making a cold smoked salmon product or a cold smoked fish product, you have to know, because it's incredibly important for control of Clostridia, how you are packaging that, okay? And the FDA makes a difference in a way the USDA does not between air permeable packaging, or what we call 10K bags, all right, which can go through a cryovac machine, but they still let oxygen permeate at the rate of 10,000 molecules per minute, is I believe what it is. Modified atmosphere packaging, so we see tuna in modified atmosphere packaging, and then reduced oxygen packaging, which is generally 4mm bags. All right, you have to know that going into your cold smoking process, because that has really big implications on how you're going to be able to package and ship your product and whether or not you're going to have to freeze it. So with that in mind, the first step of every HACCP process is we receive fish, okay? Your fish, your receiving step in Fisheries HACCP has to account for a whole set of species-related hazards or process-related hazards. If you want to know about how we do what's called inclusive HACCP in fisheries-related HACCP, all I can tell you is you're going to have to take a class. I'm happy to schedule a class with everybody, but it generally, you take it online and then we do one day in person, or we can do the whole 2.5 days together. But you have to think about species-related hazards and you have to think about process-related hazards. Okay, the species-related hazards with the most common finfish, especially salmon, is parasites for wild-caught salmon, and you have to figure out how to deal with parasites. Generally, we deal with parasites by freezing it and buying IQF salmon, Okay, there are in the Fisheries Hazard Guide, which I've uploaded to the files. You have to. There's a whole table of what, much like for trichinella, all parasites die pretty much the same way. You have to freeze the fish for a certain amount of time at a certain temperature. So a very common one that many people can do is -4 for 7 days. All right, and you have to know whether you're receiving fish that has been frozen at -4 for 7 days or -35 for like 2 hours, or you're going to be doing that process yourself, so that you can retain that. Now, I will tell you, if you're going to do that, and you're already cold smoking salmon, you may be able to capture value in the value stream by then selling that salmon into sushi production. And there is information on sushi HACCP plans that I uploaded to the files. Okay, so that's parasites. All right, there's no getting away in species that have a risk for parasites that you have to do something about it. And if you're cold smoking, the only thing you can do is freezing. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you're using aquacultured salmon, I think I posted on my business page, but the statistic is that 90% of people in the United States eat imported seafood, and of that imported seafood, 60% of it is aquacultured. Okay, so if you are using aquacultured salmon or aquacultured like whatever, you have to be aware of at receiving aquaculture drugs. When you take large numbers of animals and you concentrate them and put them in a feeding situation, which over on meat and poultry we call CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, we do the same thing with fish. And if you're taking a whole bunch of salmon and raising them in pens, they get disease because of stocking densities, the same way cows and chickens and pigs get disease because of stocking densities. We use drugs to control those diseases, and that's decisions that aquaculturing companies make. Now, it is possible to get antibiotic-free salmon. I don't think it is possible to get like antibiotic-free salmon and completely raised without pesticides, herbicides. Like we don't certify fish organic because we can't. So that's something to know as you are developing your brands, what you are going to be faced with when it comes to either parasites from wild caught, or how you're going to have to do receiving checks on fish that is coming in, because if it's aquacultured, we have to worry about aquaculture drugs, and we may have to worry about parasites, because did that aquacultured fish get fed raw fish and thus still have a risk for parasites. So that's the receiving step, and that's just receiving the fish. You also have to receive the salt, you have to receive the packaging and the labeling, and any spices or whatever that you're going to be putting on the cold smoked salmon and marinating it and brining it and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so we receive fish. All right, and I'm just going to talk about the fish because packaging and labeling and dry product storage is pretty standard between fish and meat and poultry HACCP and preventive controls and stuff. Okay, and then what you need to do is the preservation process that you're about to embark on to salt cure that fish is to decrease the ability for pathogen outgrowth. Okay, and this is where the conversation about listeria starts. All right, to control for listeria and to control for Clostridium botulinum, so botulism, you have to do some things with your fish. And the first thing that you do is you brine it, okay? And everybody has different recipes for brining. But we brine to drive out water, okay? Dehydrate, make less water available for bacteria to grow, okay? And then we replace salt for water in the fish. And then we take it and we put it in a smoker. It is important to know that much like over on meat and poultry, there's no definition of cold smoking. There is no definition of cold smoking in fisheries either. Okay, and so there is a table in the Fisheries Hazard Guide in Appendix 4 that you're going to have to refer to. Okay, and because you are producing a product that is not given a complete kill step, all right, you have to abide by the time and temperature regulations in that table in Appendix 4 of the Fisheries Hazard Guide. That can be surpassingly difficult, okay? And when I say the FDA doesn't like cold smoked salmon and cold smoked fish, this is one of the things that I'm talking about, is that they're not giving anybody information about what's okay and what's not okay. All right. So you're going to brine your fish, okay? Then you're going to smoke your fish, okay? And your smoked fish has a come up time, all right? And then it smokes, and then it's got to get cooled down. All of that has to be done within a certain set of parameters. Then you're going to bring your fish out, okay? And you're going to cool it, and you're going to continue the dehydration process, all right? Because to be within the parameters in to prevent pathogen outgrowth in the smoker, you can't dehydrate the fish enough to control for pathogens, okay? So then you're going to take it out, and you're going to put it in a walk-in. You're going to put it in something where there's a fair amount of air circulation, where the fish is going to continue to dry, generally on racks, okay? Then your whole entire purpose is to get something called your water phase salt up above 2.5 to 3.5%. I think it's 3.5%. If you are going to be doing air packaging, okay, of your smoked fish, you only have to get a 2.5% water phase salt. Okay, water phase salt is calculated by measuring a couple of different things, and there isn't a direct correlation between water activity and water phase salt. Somebody asked me that earlier. So we have to get to a specific water phase salt, because it is the water phase salt that controls for the botulism. Okay, once it is out of the smoker, okay, you have to control for cross-contamination with listeria. All right, and so we over on the FDA side of the house have something called sanitary control procedures. I will upload those. They look a lot like critical control points, and you'll notice their name, sanitary control procedures, right? So that's what we do to control for cross-contamination of Listeria monocytogenes. If you are smoking shell stock, crustacean shellfish, and finfish, you have to also control for cross-contamination of allergens. I'm not talking about allergens in this because we're talking about Fisheries HACCP, and those are one of the big 8 allergens, whether you're doing shell stock, crustacean shellfish, or finfish. So we dehydrate everything, and we cool it down. And once it has reached a desired level of dehydration, as measured by the water phase salt, then it can be sliced. Okay, and these slicing machines are pretty, they're pretty slick, but they're really hard to clean. They are, I mean, a lot of people in meat and poultry, we have these bacon slicers where there's the rotary slicer that, you use at a retail counter, but we have these big old bacon slicers that, and bring down the belly of bacon. Well, you kind of take that in fisheries and you lie it horizontally, and you send the fishery on those foil plates that they put them on, the cardboard foil, gold foil plates, and you send it through, okay, and it slices the salmon or the haddock or whatever, and those characteristic thin slices that the American consumer wants to consume their smoked salmon in. Well, that is a recipe for salmonella, or not salmonella, for listeria, okay? And so it's incredibly important that if you are going into this and somebody is trying to sell you a used slicer, because they're out on the market, that they've done their preventative maintenance correctly and the thing's not rusted from here to breakfast, and that you swab it for listeria. Okay, do not buy problems into your facility. All right, so then you slice it, okay, then you stick it in whatever bag you're going to stick it in. If it's 10K bags, you get to have a lower water phase salt. Then you stick it in your cryovac, and then you put it back into storage. Your controls for botulism, all right, are not only your water phase salt, all right, but also your keeping the product cold. It can't go above 38 degrees. Once you have basically treated fish in any way, shape, or form, your critical limit, your top critical limit for your production process is 38 degrees, because botulism can grow, doesn't grow below 38 degrees. Okay, that's your general process, okay, for making cold smoked fish. All right. In writing HACCP plans to write for cold smoked fish, you have to address listeria, you have to address Clostridium, you have to address parasites, you may have to address aquaculture drugs. Okay, and then the final thing that I want to talk about, and then I'll leave some time for questions, or if nobody asks me questions, I'll keep talking. But the final thing we have to talk about is histamines. Okay, histamine containing fish is something we only see in fisheries, obviously. And there's a whole section of dark muscled, cold loving, fast swimming fish that are what we call the histamine formers. And this is scombroid toxicity. And they are, they have a certain, they have a certain amine in their system that, when metabolized by a certain kind of bacteria, produces histamine. Okay, you all know histamine if you have ever sneezed. All right. Histamine is what, when you get in the springtime, when you get hay fever, you have cells in your sinuses that release histamine, and it causes a reaction. Well, it's not good if you eat fish full of histamine, because you will have an allergic reaction. Allergic reactions are driven by histamine. Okay, and so if you are doing salt cured fish and value-added fish production with histamine-containing species, that's a whole other HACCP plan where you have to be able to control for that histamine. Now, if you're cooking the fish, it doesn't really matter. We don't worry about histamine in, canned tuna. We worry very much about histamine in raw tuna and other, and, mahi-mahi and other histamine-containing fish. The list of fish that have the histamine problem that we have to control for it, it's all in the fisheries guide. And one of the big differences between Fisheries HACCP and Meat and Poultry HACCP is we have one validation document. It is called the Fisheries Hazard Guide, okay, the gold book. That's it. If you can't find it in there, do not pay somebody $50,000 for a validation study, because you're never going to do it. Okay. And so but that being said, you have to be able to understand how to go through that fisheries hazard guide. And that's what the class is for. Like, seriously, there's an online segment 1 from Cornell. It's like $50. You should totally take it if you have any interest in doing this whatsoever. And I'll post the link in the comments. But learning how to use that fisheries hazard guide is the only way forward, because there's so many things that you have to do. Once you have determined your CCPs, it's like everything else, you have to verify it. Well, how do we verify? We verify by records review, direct observation, calibration checking, and testing. Okay, well, it talks about how often you have to do all of that in there. I also want to point out that if you are making value-added ready-to-eat fish and you're dry curing it, you have to conform with the listeria guidance for ready-to-eat foods, which I have posted in the files. This is different from the USDA FSIS listeria guidance, because we have like 2 different agencies writing 2 different guides about the same bacteria. Don't ask me why. So the draft guidance for Listeria monocytogenes in ready-to-eat foods from FDA tells you, when you are doing a ready-to-eat food on the FDA side of the house and you are doing fish, smoked fish, you basically have to do 5 samples, a minimum of 5 samples a week from your production process. And please, for the love of God, include that in your business planning, because the amount of sampling that you have to do in ready-to-eat fish versus ready-to-eat meats is unreal. I mean, I work with a lobster processor that, I kid you not, spends $100,000 a year on testing. $100,000. Okay. And so if you are going into salt curing fish and you are making it for wholesale, please, please, please include the cost for doing listeria testing and environmental monitoring into your into your plans, into your business plans, not your into your HACCP plans as well, but also into your business plans. So that is the short version, as we say, around salt curing fish. And so I would like to pause here for just a moment and give people an opportunity to ask questions. And if you want me to dive in more into one topic or another, I'm completely happy to do it. But I'll give everybody an opportunity. Come on, don't be shy. I've been sitting in a class all day. The difference in compliance between wholesale producers and small-scale retail production. Okay, so wholesale is not size dependent. Fisheries is completely size independent. If you produce one smoked salmon a year for wholesale production, you are regulated by the FDA and you have to comply with everything that, like duck trap in Maine has to comply with. Small scale retail production of smoked fish is going to be determined by your food code and your state. And if I recall correctly, Rob, you are in New York, right? And if you want to do smoking fish at retail production, you need a scheduled process. I believe New York is the only state where you have to have that. But at retail, when you want to smoke fish, you have to talk about, okay, great, Rob. Yeah, we need to talk, and I need to put you in touch with Cornell Cooperative Extension, because the only way forward for smoking fish at retail in New York is through Cornell Cooperative Extension. All right, and so your basic idea is you have to do it under food code production, and your health departments can let you do it, but there's a lot of food safety planning that goes into it. Okay, all right. Jules asks, what's the lowest temp needed to be reached for hot smoked salmon, rainbow trout, etc.? The FDA considers a fully cooked product to be 145 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds. Okay, so the fish itself, the body of the fish itself has to get to 145 for 15 seconds on an instant read thermometer, okay? And then it has to be cooled, okay? Because we worry about the same things in fish that we worry about in meat and poultry, which is Clostridial species as the fish cools. And then because it has received a complete kill step, we worry about Listeria recontamination, okay? I also want to say something about labeling. We don't always worry about allergen labeling over on meat and poultry side of the house. Finfish, crustaceans, shellfish, and molluscan shellfish are all allergens. They're like one of the big 8 allergens, according to the FDA. And because of that, they must be labeled very specifically out in the world. They have to have their common name on there. In your production paperwork on the FDA side of the house, in your HACCP plan, you have to also include the Latin name for the product that you're talking about, because what I consider a Russ and you consider a sea bream may be different depending on where we are in the world. Okay, and so that allergen labeling is always a critical control point, and it is a critical control point applied at the labeling step. All right, and the critical limits is presence of the label, and then you have to check like 1 label per box and that sort of thing. All right, so there's that. Then the next thing, which nobody has kind of asked about, but I will address anyway, is the use of ice. There's a lot of ice used in cold smoking fisheries production for a lot of different things. Often when we brine the fish and then we pack it in ice and let the ice and because the salt draws water out of the fish, and then that melts the ice. The ice that you use in any food production, but especially in fisheries production, that ice has to be manufactured to current good manufacturing practices. CGMPs, which is 21 CFR 117 Part B. Okay, and so if you have an ice maker and you're making ice, that's awesome, but you have to include good manufacturing practices. You have to wrap your ice maker in good manufacturing practices. If you are buying in ice for your production process, and this is true meat and poultry or in fish, if you are buying packaged ice, that packaged ice is regulated by your state and must also comply with current good manufacturing practices. However, many states and their regulations have not caught up to CGMPs in 117. I mean, these are just coming into being. Not every company even has to comply with that for their food right now, but ice manufacturing must be to good manufacturing practices, okay? Because ice is regulated by the state ice regulations haven't caught up to 117, and they're still in the old GMPs. And there are some differences, documentation of training, allergen cross-contamination, listeria cross-contamination, and prevention of hazards and things in GMPs. So I want you guys to be aware of that. Okay, so we have reached the bottom of the hour, and we were doing a half hour of office hours this week because my brain is fried. I have been in class for like 10 hours a day for 2 days, and I'm toast. And so it's been great having everybody here. Please post questions, read the Fisheries Hazard Guide, just start with that and start understanding how we approach HACCP in fisheries, because it's different than how we approach HACCP in meat and poultry. It is a different HACCP process. We say HACCP in fisheries and we mean something different than when we say HACCP in meat and poultry. And that's kind of how that works. All right. Again, I'm Dr. Michelle Fanninsteel. I'm the CEO of Dirigo Food Safety. I am the food safety admin here at the Salt Cured Pig. I love you all. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Everybody, go have a beer. It's quitting time. I don't care where you are. Good night, everybody. Thanks.